We're going to be completing our quilted coasters today. So in front of me I have all the tools I'm going to need to accomplish that. I have my set of instructions. I have my quilted coaster pattern piece cut out. I have used it to cut out my fabric and my batting, so I have those pieces ready here. I have pins, shears, a blunt tool for turning. I'll show you what we're going to do with that in a little bit. A tool for marking, and of course something that can give me an indication of measurement. So anything you have for measuring is fine. I'm going to set my instructions aside just for a moment because I want to piece these or layer these pieces together in a certain way so that whenever I turn them right side out, I end up with a piece that looks like this. So we want our batting to be hidden inside, and we want to see the right side of the fabric. So what we're going to do in sewing almost all the time is going to be right sides together. Okay, so this is going to be the outside of our piece. So we have to put this on the outside. If we put this on the inside between these two to start, we're going to end up with this on the outside. So don't do that. So right sides together, and then I'm going to lay this on the outside. Okay. And marking this is okay if you have a marker. I don't have a marker, so I'm just going to turn mine over to the wrong side of this piece of fabric, and I'm going to mark it just like it tells me to do in my instructions. So we want to leave an opening so that we can turn this right side out, and we also want to know where we're going to pivot. Since we're just starting sewing on the sewing machine, it's good to have these markings to know when to pivot or when to stop sewing. So our directions tell us that we want to have a 2-inch opening on one side. So I'm going to use a pencil since that's not going to show up on the other side. It won't bleed through. I like using a pencil. So I'm going to mark pretty heavily, one marking here and one marking here to create a 2-inch gap. And this is where I'm going to start and stop sewing. I'm also going to mark my corners. Now I'm going to be using a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So this first corner I'm going to have to figure out, okay, here's a 1/2 inch in, here, 1/2 inch from here is here. So now I'm going to make my square. Okay, and my lines meet about here. Okay, so I'm going to make a nice big dot. From there, I don't have to do that for every corner. That's a little bit tedious. If I know that I can line up my ruler or my tape along with that first marking, and it's parallel to the edge, the raw edge here, I see 1/2 inch from here, and I can mark it just easily like that. So I'll use the last one every single time. I'll just make a little dot, and this is where I'm going to pivot. Okay. So now I have my opening, my 4 pivot marks, and then I'm going to pin them together. When you pin, you always want to pin perpendicular. That means pointing towards, and not parallel, but pointing towards. So you put your pins through, pointing towards the edge here, and then if I'm pinning at a corner, I will pin pointing towards the corner. Now I have a piece already set up just like that, ready to go. Okay, I have my dots marked and I have my pins in place, and I don't have a pin here, okay? But I can see my markings for my 2-inch opening. Okay. So I can get rid of my tools for a moment and pull my sewing machine over. If you have difficulty following the guidelines on the needle plate for the seam allowance with those fractions, there are magnets you can put into place. So since we're using 1/2 inch, it says 4/8, it's the same thing. I could put a magnet there to guide my fabric along so that I don't move it over any farther. It can't go any farther. Or you could put a piece of washi tape or something. You could put a piece of regular tape and just draw with a marker on it, just so you can see if you really need some guidance there. So I'm going to set my fabric underneath the needle, starting here, because remember our fabric moves away from us. So I'm going to start on this side of my opening, and then we're going to move this direction around our piece. I have my straight stitch in place. I'm sorry, I have my straight stitch selected, and I have a standard stitch length selected for this machine. This machine is a number 2 because it's just the machines that we use at school, but your machine at home might be slightly different. So I'm going to make sure, I'm going to use my hand wheel, and look, it starts right where I want it to start. So I'm going to stitch, back stitch just slightly, and keep going. Okay. What I don't want to do is sew over my needle. So out they go every time I get close to one. I'm going to sew, and I'm getting close to my dot, so I want to turn it by hand just to make sure that it ends up where I need it to be. Needles down, lift the presser foot, pivot, presser foot back down, and we're going to keep stitching. Do it the whole way around. I didn't mention it, but you can see why I like to have my pins where the head is towards the inside so that my hand can just pull them away. Last corner, pivot, and I'm going to stop here. Of course, back stitching anytime I start or stop a stitch. Okay, my needle has to be all the way up for me to be able to pull my thread. I can use my thread cutter. Now your instructions from here tell you to clip your corners and your threads. I can see it better from this side. You can see the stitching, I think, very easily from this side rather than this side, but that's up to you. And you want to clip, or just trim your threads rather, and then clip your corners because this is going to create a lot of bulk, so we want to take that out. What I don't want to do is cut through my stitching because then I'm going to have a big hole in the corner and that's not going to look nice. So clipping a corner just looks like that. So do that on all four sides. All right, if you have any little pieces hanging out, you can trim those. And then I'm going to get rid of all my scraps, get them out of the way. Okay. Now I'm going to turn my coaster right side out by gently coaxing it through this opening. I don't want to force it. I don't want to rip any stitches. So I'm just going to work it with my fingers, and it's going to eventually start to turn right side out. And then we're going to use our fingers to push it out into the general shape of a square. It's going to start to take shape. Now is when you want that blunt object. There are plastic turners, point turners out there that work nicely as a tool. I'm going to use this. It's fairly blunt. It's not a sharpened pencil that could poke through. I definitely don't want to use my shears because these are too sharp and that'll poke a hole. I don't want to rip my fabric, so I'm not going to jam it very hard. I'm just going to push so that I get a bit of a sharper corner. Okay. And you're going to do that to each one. And then you're going to fold this in so that it is nice and straight, and then you're going to press it, which is exactly what I've done with this piece. So this has all four corners pressed out. I have folded the raw edge in. I still have my opening here, and I've pressed it. So don't skip that step because you'll have something that looks very bunched like this. So you definitely want to take it to the ironing board and press it. Now we're almost done. We have to top stitch. It makes it look nice. It sews all layers together, which is what quilting technically is, and it's going to close this opening. We're going to sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now on my machine here, it does show where the 1/4 inch seam allowance is here on the bobbin cover, on the slide plate, but it doesn't show it up here. I could use my metal, or my magnet rather, to help guide, but the edge of my foot here is actually a 1/4 inch from where the needle falls. So I'm going to use that. I'm going to move this out of the way, put it inside my extension table. And I'm going to start on you can start in the middle, you can start in a corner. Wherever you start is where you want to finish. So I suppose I could just start towards the end here. Okay. I I have my fabric lined up right underneath my foot. Presser foot is down. I'm going to start and back stitch, and I'm just going to go the whole way around without talking so you can see what happens. All right, last corner. What I've been doing is visually estimating. I've had some practice, so I can tell where I believe I should pivot, but you can always check. Use your hand wheel, put the needle down, pivot. Oh, not quite enough. Maybe I'll just go one more stitch. Needle down, pivot. Okay, now I'm in line. So whatever it takes, take your time. Okay, now I'm gonna I can see where my stitching started. I'm going to overlap that just slightly. Back stitch. Needle up. I can pull mine out. Okay. And now all I have to do is trim my threads on both sides. You can take it to the iron again and press it one more time if you like. Now I have a coaster.